Hi folks, Kyle here from Superlinear. At the beginning of 2021, I wrote an article looking at about 14 million tweets covering dozens of political and social topics as they were discussed on Twitter. And from that data set, I was able to draw an overall picture of the landscape of South African politics as it stood at the end of 2020, going into 2021. I wrote that up as an article, and I thought that I would summarize the key takeaways from that article in this video. So what we're going to be discussing today are 4 dynamics that are shaping South Africa's current political landscape. These insights come from Twitter data, but I think they apply to everything that we do. How Twitter works is, while it might not represent South Africa, it sits at the head of the South African news pipeline, so to speak. Politicians use Twitter like a digital soapbox. They stand up there and they espouse their message, and they build an audience around that message. And that message gets picked up by journalists and the media, and it gets injected into our mainstream discourse. So while Twitter might not represent the average South African, it definitely represents the narratives that sweep us up as a country. What we're going to be looking at today are interaction networks. Imagine, if you will, a Twitter user tweets or retweets or @mentions someone like Donald Trump for some reason, mentioning the Chinese president, who in turn mentions the Indian president. We would connect these connections, we would connect these users together. On the other end of the spectrum, we might have Angela Merkel speaking to the American president, and we would connect them together. And every time they interact with each other, we end up mapping a network of connections that gets quite complex. And once we have this network, we can do something called community detection on this network. We can identify the different groups of individuals speaking amongst themselves more than to other groups within this network. It's a community detection algorithm called the Louvain modularity algorithm in this case. And what this algorithm is doing is it's highlighting a way in which people work that is colloquially captured by the phrase birds of a feather flock together, or more formally referred to as homophily. So generally speaking, when you find groups and communities, they are homogeneous groups of like-minded individuals with the same agendas and the same ideas. But we do have to caveat this and say that you can also be part of this group because you're debating with these people and you get drawn in through interacting with them in that way. So just because someone is part of this group, we cannot with 100% certainty say that they are ideologically aligned or anything like that. We have to just be careful when we do that. But it does give us an idea of the main groups of discourse that are emerging within our political landscape. So what does this kind of network look like for South Africa at the end of 2020 / the beginning of 2021? Well, here you go. Here are millions of South African users on Twitter speaking amongst themselves. And what we've highlighted in different colors are the different communities that are discussing amongst themselves. What are these communities? In pink, we've got journalists, the mainstream media like News 24, Mail and Guardian, all the big media outlets. They were combined with the official government health entities like Zweli Mkhize's account and the health department in general. And that's not so surprising because 2020 was the year of COVID, and there was a tight symbiosis as the health department needed to communicate regularly with the citizenry about the state of COVID-19, and the main way in which they did that was through the media. We then also see sitting near the center of the discussion President Ramaphosa's account, along with some progressives supporting him, and Tito Mbowene's community. As we know, Tito Mbowene's got quite a strong following of his own. On the other end of the spectrum, in blue, we have a combined community consisting of the EFF and the Radical Economic Transformers. Now, this is the first time in the many years I've been measuring South African Twitter where the EFF and the RET communities have been combined. And as we saw with the Nkandla Tea Party, this data presaged what eventually ended up happening, as we know that these groups have now aligned to a greater extent than they have in the past, where previously they were at each other's throats and they sat in very distinct communities, somewhere that changed in 2020. What's also worth pointing out is that that media and government health entities community has always sat at the very, very center of the South African discourse on Twitter. If Tito Mboweni is at the center now, he's the only central point in this network. Previously, that circle around Tito Mboweni would have been a lot larger and would have been pink. We all, as South Africans, would have received our same facts from the media. We would have departed in different directions in our interpretation of those facts, but we would have all gone to that media core for our central interpretation of things. And this is the first year in which the media has been muscled off to the side. And it seems that it's being muscled off to the side by more radical voices in this merged EFF-RET community. As we'll see shortly, there are a few elements of polarization happening within South African discourse. And one of them is this muscling out of the media from the center of the community, center of the network. This is a pre-step to the kind of polarization, social polarization that one can see in places like America, where Democrats and Republicans don't even live in the same echo chambers. They each get their own interpretation of the news, and they each get their own interpretation of the facts. South Africa has, over the years, avoided that kind of scenario, but this step is a pre-step towards that kind of polarization occurring. Behind the newly combined EFF-RET community, we see the Put South Africans First community, which pushes out a nationalist South African first message with some heavy xenophobic elements to it. And as we'll see, that community is actually eating into the audience that the EFF and the RET group currently enjoy. Then at the bottom, we have what is colloquially referred to as Black Twitter. Is that a good name for that? Probably not. You've got the likes of Adver Barry Rue in there. You've got many different paid influencers, slightly less politicized, slightly more focused on gossip, popular culture, but they do weigh in on politics as well. And we can see within that an even tighter core of paid influencers in yellow that also lead that conversation. Brand ambassadors, that kind of paid influencer. Then up top, we've got this charcoal community, which is the white body politic. Given the small size of white South Africans, it's only about 8% of the population, what we find is that they all get grouped together, or mostly get grouped together within a single community in charcoal over there. But within that community is actually quite a diverse range of ideological beliefs. And then sitting on top of the white body politic, we have this alt-right MAGA overlap with the USA. These are accounts that are some South African expats or American accounts talking about South Africa, using South Africa as an example of things like white genocide and other narratives that we get used as examples for the rest of the white world from a more of a right-wing perspective. And this is also a community where my past research has shown that some of the most dodgy behavior is happening, where bots are likely to exist, for example. The other community where we know that bots have played a role in the past and might in the future is in the radical economic transformation community, which came into being after the Gupta bots were created in 2016 to defend President Zuma's allies and the Gupta brothers, and to attack their enemies like journalists and so-called white monopoly capital, which is the term they popularized within South African discourse. So we do know of bots being used in a few places. There's also some early indications that there's inauthentic behavior happening within the Put South Africans First community, which kind of appeared almost overnight around March 2020. So there's a lot going on here within South African political discourse. And we have to bear in mind that as our narratives are framed, they're not always framed through the organic, authentic will and beliefs of the people. They are framed by political interests, and that framing, that inauthentic framing of our political narratives is occurring across the political divide. We then also have the rest of Africa kind of weighing in and watching onto our politics to a greater extent than used to be. That's what's happening there in orange. Here's another way of looking at communities. What this is showing you is on the x-axis, the proportion of users in the dataset that fell into each community, and on the y-axis, the proportion of tweets that were generated by each community. What one might naively expect is that communities would generate tweets in proportion to the number of users they have. So where you see a bubble above the diagonal line, that is a community that is generating more tweets than we would expect given how many members they have. In other words, these are the passionate communities that are shouting. These are the communities, these are the loudest voices in our political discourse. And there's three of them that really stand out for me. The newly combined EFF-RET community, the white body politic, and the Put South Africans First community. These are the loudest voices shaping our narratives on Twitter. And as I said up front, what happens on Twitter has a way of bleeding into our national discourse. So to summarize, what does the South African political landscape look like at the moment? Slightly off to the side, where it used to be in the middle, we have the media, progressives, and centrists. Muscling in onto the central discussions, we have the radicals, nationalists, and xenophobes. Below that, we have Black Twitter, including a heavy contingent of paid Twitter, officially paid Twitter, not necessarily bots and sock puppets, but more like brand ambassadors and those kinds of things. Increasingly sidelined, we have the white body politic, as it's being pulled towards these MAGA-style narratives up from America, imported from America. And then we have the rest of the world, or the rest of Africa at least, looking on. Let's dive into this radicals, nationalists, and xenophobes group. As I said before, in the years and years of looking at this data, this is the first time I've ever seen the RET groups combined with the EFF groups. Normally, they would have been very diametrically opposed to each other. Yeah, we have them grouped together for the first time. And we seem to be seeing that alliance playing out in the media through the likes of the Nkandla Tea Party. So there we've got the EFF community. We've then got public RET figures like Mzondile Mansina and Mzwane Manyi, but we've also got the anonymous RET figures who push a more strident message. And then on the other side of the debate, we have the Put South Africans First community, which also includes Herman Mashaba's Action Essay as they use the South Africans First line to gain political momentum for their new party. And similarly, the ATM party also uses a South Africans First narrative to push their political agenda. And from the perspective of the data, it finds that they're speaking to the same audience that is tapped into the more strident xenophobic aspect of Put South Africans First, pushed by accounts like Ulurathu Pillay and Landback. We then also have a more general BC or Black consciousness community being led by Ntsiki Mazwai. She really is the key influencer there, not necessarily buying into Put South Africans First or any particular political party, at least not in terms of what the data is showing in terms of the audience that she is speaking to. Then on the other side, you have the white body politic. And like I said, this is a very diverse community in terms of ideology. You've got classical liberals, you've got progressives, you've got American-style libertarians, you've got traditional Afrikaner conservatives, you've got the alt-right, you've got, well, let's have a look. So towards the bottom of this community, you've got the more progressive elements who are really engaging with the political debates as they stand in South Africa, which I think it's safe to say South Africa's popular political debates tend towards more left-leaning discussions. That's where the progressives and the white body politic weigh in. You then get your libertarians, including your podcasters and the Institute of Race Relations and associated people like Unathi Kwaza. You've got the DA sitting in there, sitting somewhere between traditional liberals, libertarians, and conservatives these days. You've got the Afrikaner conservatives like AfriForum. You've got the more strident farm murders community down below, which is not averse to slightly more extreme messaging, one might say. And then you've got sitting on top of this entire community like a cancerous growth, you've got this MAGA overlap with the USA. And as you can see, that is not a natural fit of that community. The way in which it sits off to the side shows us that it's not organically integrated into our white body politic conversations. And again, like I said, my past research has shown that a lot of strange activity happens in there, bot activity, and a preponderance of, a higher number of suspensions by Twitter. It's all happening at this interface here between the MAGA community, where it pushes a lot of conspiracy theories, and the white community. And the American MAGA-style narratives are kind of bleeding into the white body politic from this community and attenuating the white body politic community as it pulls it apart and stretches it, and contributes to polarization. So to summarize, what are the 4 dynamics that are taking place in South Africa today? One is that the media is being displaced from the center of our discussions. No longer are we all working with the same facts, or to a lesser and lesser degree are we working towards this, we're working with the same facts. Like I said, we might depart from the interpretation of those facts, but more than ever we're not even working with the same facts. As our media landscape splinters through the likes of independent media, which no longer is part of the press council, and through the attacks on the veracity and objectivity of traditional media, all these things are causing a splintering in our media. That's also seeming to help move it out of the way. But what's also pushing and muscling into the space of the traditional media are the more radical voices which have merged. The EFF voices, the RET voices seem to have merged. They're definitely speaking to a combined audience. And even as their radical message around divisive race politics is tapping into certain aspects of the South African psyche, they are being undercut by an even more populist message, an even more base populist message, which is that of put South Africans first. The same people who listen to the same probably frustrated, disenfranchised South Africans who look at the current situation and want for more, those people that might previously have been attracted towards the radical message of the EFF and the RET groups are increasingly turning towards an even more base, radical, populist message around the fear of the other, the fear of foreigners, their neighbors, and a kind of nationalist message. Now, the question that needs to be asked with this more base national message is it an authentic narrative? And if not, is it a cynical political project? And as we've seen, there's some new political parties. Some of those new political parties have very old political links. They are clearly riding the momentum of this messaging. And to what extent is that a conscious political thing that they're doing? And to what extent are they just being political opportunists? And finally, white South Africans are becoming increasingly isolated, as the perception is that they're strangers in their own land, that they're being persecuted, whether rightly or wrongly. You can say what you want to about that, and depending on where you sit, you'll agree with that, or you'll call it white fragility, or whatever the case may be, depending on where you sit. But regardless, white South Africans are becoming increasingly isolated, and they are making sense of their place in the world through imported MAGA-style narratives, which is probably only going to further contribute to the polarization. So these are the 4 dynamics that are taking place in South Africa today, as we see different groups move. And I think the bigger picture is that these all contribute to greater polarization. What's not a dynamic here is more reasoned, rational, non-racial debate. What is the bigger picture here is increasingly diverse, divisive, polarizing debate. And we need to obviously expect more of our leaders that refuse to buy into this very base politics. What we need is leaders who can rise above it and return us to the ideals that our constitution was founded on. And until we do that, what we're going to see is a continuing drifting apart of the different parts of our society, the continuing antagonism of the different parts of our society. So let's all not feed into these narratives. Every time you see something emotional on social media that feeds into these narratives, that feeds into base stereotypes about our countrymen and our women, let's ignore those narratives, and let's hold the people accountable who try to push these narratives for their own cynical gains, and let's rise above it and realize that we're all stronger together. Thank you.